So this is Hanu, France 1940, part of the Grand Operational Simulation series by Decision Games. And one of the joys of these smaller footprint kind of titles to play with, to experiment with the rule set, is that it's very easy to rip down and restart. So it's a 20-minute job to sort of reset this up and go again. I'm actually on my fourth attempt at playing this. This is playthrough 4, which as a starting point ought to give a fair indication that I think it's reasonably worthwhile having an extensive look at, which I do, because it's a very enjoyable game, even if the rules take some getting used to. And when I say take some getting used to, they take some deciphering and some searching online and some, oh, that's what they meant kind of thing. So we've just played a night turn, and this is the first time I played a night turn. And to play every third turn is a night turn, but you can only really do anything in a night turn if you've drawn a night chit, and both sides have chits that they draw. And if it says this is a night turn for you, then you're allowed to perform ground assaults and move without having fatigue. And if you don't have your night chit, any moves or fighting that you do costs you fatigue, and fatigue's bad because it halves your movement and it halves your combat strength and so on. So it's all very bad having fatigue, and so unless you get a night chit, you probably don't want to do anything at night. Okay, all well and good. This is the first time I'd really tried to exploit the night chit as the Germans, because the Germans start with a night chit that they can play in the first night turn automatically, and so they can guarantee that they're going to get a night attack in the first night turn 3, which is what's just happened. And you can see lots of French stacks with fatigue 1, fat 1 markers, and one up there with a fatigue 2. And that's as a result of having to reorganise their line due to German breakthroughs. So the Germans broke through here quite effectively, and they punched through this line here as well. I have to say that attacking in this game is quite tricky, and that's good, because it really forces you to think, and it forces you to focus your attention on where you want to do an attack. It's not a case of rolling all your units up in a big long line and attacking along the line. You really do have to think quite carefully about what you're going to put into attack and where, because the restrictions are such that you usually only get 1 or 2 good attacks in, and with the number of prepared assault markers that you're allowed, which is the only way to get a multi-stack attack in, which is the only way to get your odds anywhere close to 2-1 or 3-1, unless the defense is really poor, unless you're attacking a really weak unit on its own. But if you're going to attack a stack of enemy units, the only way to get 2-1 or possibly 3-1 is a multi-hex attack, and that means having multiple prepared assault markers down, and that means there's a knock-on effect of all these rules. There's also subtle little rules in here, like if you do break through, as happened here, and you're allowed to advance after combat, then the first hex of advance doesn't have enemy movement halts in it, which means that adjacent enemy units don't halt you, which means you can infiltrate further through the position, which is what happened here and forced the French back, and that prompted all this fatigue as they had to rearrange their line in the night time. And so there's some sophistication and subtlety in exploiting the system. Having said that, you're trying to do that at a time when you're also grappling with rules that are often fairly murky. Not by design, just key little things are omitted. And you can figure them out, but that it does add some mental overhead. So, for example, the night turn I just played, the night rules don't tell you that you can attack at night. In fact, they tell you can't attack at night. You cannot perform ground assaults at night. But then there it tells you that if you've got a prepared assault, you've got a prepared assault move of 1 rather than the normal 2 at night. Well, you can't. Those two rules can't be true, because it can't be true that you both can't attack at night and can have a prepared assault marker on you, which only gives you a move of 1. And then it tells you that there's a 1 left column shift for attacking at night, which it's told you can't do. So you can infer that then it must be possible to attack at night with one of these night chits. It just doesn't say you can, and you know, so you're kind of piecing things together. Yeah. Anyway, turn 4 here, and we're about to pull some more night chits for both sides. The Germans start with 4 chits, 2 of which allow them to act at night, and 2 of them which don't. When they use one that does allow them to act at night, then they have to discard it, so they're down to 1 in 3, and the French start at 1 in 3. So we're going to do a random chit draw for them and place them in the turn 6 box up here. We're going to assign air and artillery points and do some other logistical stuff like that in this command phase, make sure things are in supply, and then we'll be getting on with a German turn where they will be looking to exploit some of these weakened French stacks due to the fatigue. So I've just got to the end of the German part of turn 5, which is the PM turn for day 2, and you can see the French casualties are beginning to mount up here. And yeah, most of these are pretty weak units, you know, 1 strength. They've been sacrificing engineers or these little 1 strength units where possible to, you know, take step losses off them. We've just lost an armoured unit up here. What this is showing, though, is that the Germans are being quite effective in breaking down and breaking through the French lines. And if we have a look at the position, you know, there's a fatigued unit here and an HQ back there, and the Germans are threatening to break through. They couldn't. Their exploit movement is only half their normal movement, and they couldn't get across a river and move adjacent, so they couldn't actually get to that HQ. But they're threatening. And then there's a breakthrough here with a German unit that's got all the way through the French lines, smashed through here. And this thing here, Fatigue 2, is just a one remaining step of an infantry battalion with a, you know, 1 final step on it. Nothing much there. Because the Germans broke through there, threatening to break through up here. These guys are out of supply. I think these Germans are going to be out of supply unless these pull back and give them a supply line, but the French will probably try and pull them back to a point where to a position where they continue to cut supply from these. Anyway, it's all breaking down and getting quite messy, but it just goes to show that once you start sort of appreciating how the rules fit together and how they work and how you can manipulate them, then you can be quite effective. And in this case, without wanting to give too much away, you know, you really do need to attack in that first. I think you really do need to attack in that first night turn as the Germans. The reason being that it's extremely difficult to get rid of fatigue if you're on the front line, nigh on impossible. Mechanised units can only recover fatigue if they don't move, don't fight, and are at least 1 hex away and not observable by the enemy. 1 hex away from any enemy units, or 2 hex away from, and not observable by them. And as the Germans, you know, you can, even if you retreat, you can't recover fatigue, and then as the Germans, you just push right up next to them and you can observe them and they can't recover fatigue. So, you know, these are pretty much all mechanised. There aren't any leg units, which are slightly easier to recover. So the upshot of that, you know, not wanting to argue through the minutiae of the rules, but the upshot is that, you know, unless you can get off the front line, you know, you can't, and behind something that blocks the enemy advance, you're going to be lucky to recover fatigue, and you know, which is perfectly viable, perfectly reasonable, you know, set of rules. However, the French only have a front line here. You know, that's all they've got. They've got to string stuff across the map to try and stop a German advance. And as they lose units, they've got fewer and fewer things to string across the map, and so the individual stacks get weaker and weaker. And these fatigue markers, the Germans attack into these guys at night and drop fatigue onto all the French who don't know what's going on, and then halve their strength as they push forward through the day, and the night chip means you can attack at night without amassing fatigue, and that gives you a massive advantage. So you have to exploit that as much as possible. But once you do start doing that and exploiting your exploit movement, so that if the French try and fall back, you just press up against them and so on, lock them in place, don't let them recover, you can be very effective. You can see the Germans have broken through down here, and this is the gain line that they have to get across, I think by turn, is it by turn 11? Yeah, I can't quite remember. But anyway, the Germans only need to get over into here, and they've met that obligation. So yeah, tricky stuff for the French. The only good thing going for the French is that in the night turn coming up, irrespective of whether they've got a night shot or not, they're going to get 3 divisions of reinforcements come on. So that's going to be a great help for them. And that also gives me some confidence that the game's going roughly as it is designed to. You know, as I started to explore the rules in some of my earlier games, the Germans not attacking in the opening night turn was still stuck up over here when the French were bringing all these reinforcements on, and I was thinking something can't be quite right. The Germans are not managing to advance at all against the French line, and yet the French are now bringing in, you know, tons of reinforcements which have got all the time in the world to get set exactly where they want to, whereas here we have the Germans breaking through, the French struggling to hold them, and at pretty much that point the French reinforcements starting to come on. So the sequencing and timing feels as if, okay, you know, we feel like we're playing the game competently rather than the German attack stalling somewhere outside Hanu and then me wondering what I'm doing wrong. So I have to say the Germans have been rolling phenomenally well this game as well, and their attack rolls, they've been rolling 91s, 97s and all kinds of high numbers, which doesn't harm your chances. Anyway, coming into the French turn now, they've got lots to think about, because if they can't get a line strung back across the map with the units they've got available, then they're going to be giving up victory point. But also they've got the problem that they've got static HQs. They made their HQs static so that they could have as much artillery available as possible, and now those HQs are pretty much in the front line. So there's a limit to how far the French can pull back here, simply because their HQs can't move, and you know, it's not entirely clear to me what happens if your HQs are wiped out, but it's not good, I don't think. It probably makes the supply extremely difficult, so you probably have to use some reinforcement points to rebuild them or something. But I think, you know, a division without an HQ would be pretty much permanently out of supply, unless it, you know, could draw supply directly down, you know, main roads, main and secondary roads from a supply point. Anyway, there it is. This is Hanu, France 1940 by Decision Games, a light version or an abridged version of the Grand Operational Simulation series, and I'm enjoying it a lot. I'll come back with more as it progresses. So we came into turn 6 here in Hanu, France 1940, Decision Games, GOS system, the usual. Turn 6, the Germans flipped their chit over, and I've been drawing these blind, so I don't know what's coming up. The Germans flipped their knight chit over, and it was a German dummy, which means that anything essentially the Germans want to do, like moving or conducting attacks. Well, you can't conduct attacks without a knight chit. So, but if they wanted to move, they'd incur fatigue. So they just decided to pretty much stay put. And then I flipped the French over, and they had their actual knight chit, as you can see, which is interesting because they've also got 3 divisions worth of reinforcements due to arrive, which I've got to pull out and set up. But what that's going to mean is that the second mechanised and third mechanised divisions that are on the board have got some counterplay in them now, because they could potentially run in and fatigue a lot of the German attackers. So, for example, there's this very dangerous breakthrough here. Well, we as the French have got quite a lot of artillery to spend if we want to. So we could attack these actually and just fatigue them for having taken part in an attack. We could drop into these areas here, or into the and drop some artillery in here, and then attack into try and force some retreats. Or we could drop in and then try and hit them with some artillery and then attack. So we've got some options here as to try and fatigue the German attackers that are coming for us. And similarly down here, we've got a lot of artillery to spend. We're in quite bad shape, but we've got some very potent armour, and we might quite like to put that up against some of the weaker German armour and see if we can't cause some problems. So that we've got some potential here, and given that these mechanised divisions get withdrawn at some point anyway, and that's coming up in the fairly near future, it seems very sensible right now to make use of this fortuitous knight chit and throw some of these into some counterattacks and see if we can't disrupt the German progress. So some counterplay in the French here as we come into turn 6. It's going to be interesting. So I've come into turn 10, the AM turn of May the 15th, 1940, here in Hanu, France, 1940. The Germans attacked along the line in a couple of places, so they attacked this stack here. It was in here, I think, somewhere like that, or maybe back here. Yeah. Anyway, that got attacked and forced back, but of course, that you often end up, because of the artillery fire that the defender can put in, especially with these French with lots of artillery, which they have, they can cause some casualties on the way in, and they did so. So they sort of traded casualties, but were forced back there. In here though, in this forest, there's a forest here with a vantage point, so very good defensive terrain there. And you can see it entirely surrounded by, German armour and stuff. All that with prepared attack counters on it were unable to shift this, and actually took casualties from the combat and from the artillery fire. And so the French held that in what was quite a really good result for them. The second mechanised of the French withdrew overnight, which is why there's this big hole here in the French line. And these third mechanised are going to withdraw next turn. So the French have got a turn now with them, and then next turn they will withdraw. So they've got to plan for that. They'll probably just stay put now, since they're sort of holding the line in the centre here. But these guys want to fall back. This is the first motorised, I think. Yeah. I think 1M is the first motorised, and then 1MO is the first Moroccan. Anyway, these guys are sort of tethered to that northern map edge up there and can't move more than 5 hectares away, so their job is to defend these victory locations in here if possible. And so they want to fall back so that they're not because they're at the moment the third motorised is sort of protecting their flank, but that protection is about to go away. So they've got some falling back to do. Other than that, the French are pretty much set in defensive positions that aren't too bad. The Germans are sort of up to the gain line that they need to get to and cross in order to start taking victory point locations. You can see them here, here and here. There's a big one in here that's worth 3 points. I think another one, and then there's ones down here. But the Germans are going to run out of time quite soon, because there's next turn and then a night turn and then one more day, and then we're going to see where we're at. But it's compelling stuff. It's really interesting, beautiful sort of ebb and flow to it, and it feels right, you know, when you've got opportunity to manoeuvre and outmanoeuvre things, and then you've got a chance to make ground. But where there's, you know, good quality troops in good defensive locations with artillery support, it's extremely difficult to make progress, and that feels about right. So it's not making me scratch my head and think, oh god, what are you supposed to do here? And you do have to kind of use your resources quite wisely, your artillery resources quite wisely, and your air power and so on. So you know, the French will get their artillery reset after their turn. So you know, and the French artillery is quite daunting. Yeah, but luckily for the Germans, this third mechanized division is going to get pulled, and they're going to have much clearer runs through into this central area north of Gembloux here. Still lots of sort of dynamic situations that are going to arise, and the French are having to take account of that. So yeah, I'm about to do the French move. Of course, they've got to also maintain this sort of north-south set of units. They've not struggled to do that so far, but mainly because their reinforcements arrived just in time. But you can see they've got, you know, you can bounce through 3 hex groups of units up to from the north edge to the south edge, so that's fine. But they've got to maintain that when the second motorised has withdrawn. And if we withdrew the second motorised right now, that then wouldn't be true. They'd be giving up victory points, because there's just too much space between stuff. So it may be that some of this, so one of these divisions, maybe the 15th motorised, has to push a bit further north to maintain those lines of communication across the map. Anyway, I've got that to sort out now, so that's my next job. So we're into the final day here at Hanu, France 1940, by Decision Games, part of the GOS series. The Germans have pushed right up against some victory point locations here, so they've got a 2-point victory location there to try and get into, and a couple here, not pretty weakly held. So some victory points potential here. There's a 3-point spot here, but they haven't really got much in the way of force around, and running out of time to really put a serious threat on this town of Gembloux. I suspect it's Gembloux. Anyway. Yeah, but they do have significant forces around this little town here of Beuzet, and up here at Paubay and Ernage. I hope I'm pronouncing those reasonably close. They're not going to get anywhere close to, you know, these serious victory point locations down here or up in here, but you know, they are at the point, they've crossed the point where you know, the road they had to get across, and they are putting threats on these victory point locations, and we'll see how much they can get done. The interesting thing that happens now is that the French can no longer simply back away from the artillery and airstrikes, which is what they've been doing across the rest of the map, you know. So now, you know, the Germans have got 24 air points, and they can drop a big airstrike into here. And if the French want to continue to hold it, they've got to take the casualties rather than just retreat away and you know, forget it. Similarly with, you know, these other locations. So that's what changes here, but I don't think the Germans have got here quite quickly enough to, you know, they'd like another day really. They'd like to have got here a couple of turns earlier, and they could have put much more damage, you know, into the defensive positions with artillery and airstrikes. But as it is, they've had to be in mobile mode a lot of the time to move up, and so they're not in static mode, which gives them far more artillery points and so on. So they're far more likely to be taking heavy casualties from this in French artillery. I mean, like the 15th motorised has got 18 points here, and 13 points here, and 10 points here. The French have got 41 total artillery points, and the Germans haven't got anywhere near that. But anyway, the Germans will, you know, do what they can. They have got 24 air points, which is significant, and 3rd Panzer has kept its HQ in static and has got 13 artillery, which should give it some threat in here. Anyway, that's the thing that changes, is that the French now actually have to try and hold locations rather than playing sort of a delaying game, and so we'll have to take the consequences of the artillery and airstrikes. Let's see what happens. So I think I've reached the end here in Hanu, France 1940, decision games. The reason I say that is we've just done the French turn, the German portion of turn 14, so we could do a French portion of the turn, but there's not much point. And then I flipped the knight chits just to see what we got, and we had, as you can see there, a German dummy and a French dummy. So again, if people want to go acting in the knight, they're just going to get fatigued and not be very effective. There could be some value in it for the Germans in the victory point stakes. So we'll just tot up where we're at the moment, and that is a German marginal victory, which is 5 to 10 victory points. 4 or less victory points is a French victory, and then the Germans get a marginal in 5 to 10, tactical 11 to 19, and 20 or more VPs is a decisive. And of course there's the auto victories that neither side managed either. So this was a marginal victory for the Germans. You can see that, you know, they've pushed right up across the board, and they're knocking on the door. They didn't manage to take this. This infantry held on in here, made the PR check he needed to survive the retreats he got, and he's got 1 step left. Otherwise that would have been another, well, it would have been 2 victory points for the location, and the attackers could have pushed on into here and taken another 2 victory points, and they'd have actually had, this would have tipped them over into a 3rd victory point for casualties, and they'd have got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 victory points for all that, and that would have pushed them into the tactical victory. But they didn't quite make it, and although I could do this at night, I could make a night assault in here to see if they could do it. I could also move lots of French around to reinforce it, and I just can't quite find the energy to do all that. So let's just leave it as it is. I've got an attack up here that I could have done as well, but I ran out of gas because it's not worth any points really. Again, except it might be worth a point in terms of casualties. If we look at the casualties, this is the French casualty box. There's 2 steps of armour, which is worth a victory point, and then all these remaining steps, which is 22 steps of French, is worth another 4 victory points. You get 1 every 5. So that's 5 victory points there. And then the Germans took this spot here, which is worth another 2, and that's 7 victory points, and they lost 5 steps of units, which is 1 victory point for the French. That's a grand total of 6 for the Germans, and as I say, if they'd taken this, they could have picked up 6. They could have picked up another 2 and another 2 and 1 for the casualty, and that would have gone 8, 10, 11, and that would have taken them onto a tactical victory. So they were pushing for a tactical victory here, but not quite there, and that feels about right, given that I'm, you know, not entirely savvy or au fait with the game, and I'm sure I didn't do every last bit of maximising that I could have done. Partly I would partly cite the rules for that. This is a game that wants you to maximise, and then the rules aren't quite precise enough to allow you to know how, which is slightly frustrating. But as you can see, and as I think I previously said, this is my 4th run through of this, getting to various points before I realise I'm doing things wrong, not quite getting things right, rechecking things and so on. So it's rare for me to persevere with a game though and then go for 4 playthroughs. I have really enjoyed it. It's an excellent game. There's so much subtlety, there's a lot of nuance and subtlety in how you go about doing things. The way the terrain, the artillery, the armor ratings, the anti-tank ratings, the everything interacts in really quite sophisticated ways. It's fun to play. It's fun to think about, and you can nearly always see things to do to move you forward. You don't ever feel like you're in this sort of inert, no point doing anything situation. There's always something to do, which is what I liked about it most. So yeah, had really good fun with this, and I'm just going to upload this because it's been on the table a very long time and I need to pack it away and do something else.